Hey everybody, welcome back. Sorry it's been a minute. Life gets busy sometimes, and here we are in the stretch run. A month and a half or so left in the season, and I hope to have a few more breakdowns for you. Today we are talking about the return of DL Hall and what was encouraging, what was different than the guy we saw in April to the guy that we saw on Sunday against the Reds, and things that we're going to be looking forward to for the rest of the season for DL Hall. The Brewers getting ready for the Dodgers tonight. If you're watching this on Monday as I upload this, encourage you to tune into the postgame all week long. We got Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday postgame shows for maybe the biggest series to date for the crew since at least that Philly series they had in June, as they get ready to face Clayton Kershaw, and Freddie Peralta goes for the crew tonight here on Monday. But let's jump into what DL Hall had going for him on Sunday. I know it didn't end the Brewers' way, but there was a lot of good from what DL Hall did, and let's go ahead and jump in and break things down. First thing I want you to show and look at here is this is a scatter plot of pitch movement. So what a scatter plot is it's showing us pitcher movement. And basically, this view, if you can imagine it, is from the hitter's perspective. So anything being from a left-handed pitcher, obviously, you see that cluster of sliders here, that's coming from into a righty because I'm, a right-handed hitter, so that's how I'm going to see things here. Curveballs coming down and in. So let's just go ahead and give you the basics of how we read this here real quick, and I'll draw a line here as well to help you visualize zero. Anything to the left of this or, in these quadrants tells you the pitch is moving in to a righty from who we know DL Hall is a left-hander. Same with these curveballs. And then, as you can imagine, anything below zero, because zero is actually up here for the vertical axis, anything down here is downward movement. Don't really pay attention to the negative because pitches are technically always moving downward. It's just the perception versus gravity. We can get really deep in the weeds with that, but that's not the point of this video. This is his start against the Reds on Sunday, the scatter plot you see here. So you can see the key in all the pitches. A few things that we always look at for scatter plots is how consistent are your pitches. And for instance, the fastball command, the similar movement profile is how you're able to develop command. The slider, he had a couple get away from him, but the curveball was exceptional. The changeup was a lot better than what we've seen. So again, this is just from his pitches on Sunday, regardless of result. How did the ball come out of his hand? So this is just a quick peek at what Sunday looked like. And I know this doesn't really have a lot of context to it. Well, let me add some context to this by taking a peek at what April looked like for DL Hall, okay? And you see what we're talking about, the lack of consistency. And let me stop here and say, there's a lot more pitches here, obviously, to say the least, than just one start of 92 pitches versus his first 328 pitches as a Brewer. But instantly you see the size of the fastball blot, and then the curveball has a lot of different movement. He had some that he really snapped down low with a lot of horizontal. He had some that he kind of spun up high here that didn't really do much. Whereas the other thing that worries me is how close some of these changeups are to blending with these fastballs. These are things that, if you're getting a couple of pitches too close together, and this is something you would normally see, like pitches near each other with fastballs and sinkers and cutters, you'll have a big range of dots here that do a little bit different, right? If you're having your changeup getting a little too close to your fastball, that could indicate, something might be going wrong with that pitch. And just to make it a little bit easier for the visual learners out there, let's just go ahead and compare them side by side here. Just looking, quick peek, you can see, again, the size of that blot is bigger than it was over here. The changeup has a little bit more separation than it did back in April. The slider is virtually the same. These are outliers over here, but he has a little bit less horizontal, but a lot more vertical than he did back in April. This is April over here, and pretty close, a little bit less vertical, but it's a slider. It's not the end of the world. Love the consistency of the curveball here. Nothing was really snapping beyond his control. If he can keep it in here, he feels like maybe that's something he can control. He took a little bit of horizontal out and took a little bit more vert out. So what leads to some of these things? And I'm trying to stay only public facing today. So let's go back to Baseball Savant to the player breakdowns here. I'm in the Illustrator box right now. When you go back into a game, so I'll just show you how I do it. We go to the date of the game, August 11th, scroll over to the Brewers and the Reds. We'll scroll here to player breakdowns. This shows you all the pitchers. You can even toggle this to be the batters and see all the pitches that they saw throughout a day. But for this sake, we're looking at DL Hall. Here are all of his pitches he's thrown in the game. Few things that jump out, and the beauty of Baseball Savant tells you a few things right off the bat. Number one, today versus his yearly average velo. It tells you automatically with these red arrows and red characters, he's got some more velo all of a sudden compared to his league average. He averaged 94.6 miles an hour on his fastball. So 95 if you round up. That is a full 2 miles an hour faster than he was back in April, suggesting he's healthy. Same thing with the other pitches, the curveball and the slider. And this also goes back to what we were talking about with the pitch movement. When you're throwing it a little bit harder, a few things happen to your breaking balls. Number one, they're generally going to move a little bit less simply because they're thrown harder. But the reason why they're thrown harder is either mechanics, it could be release point, or it could be a grip change, that sort of thing. One of the things that I'm intrigued to look at, and naturally when velo goes up, spin tends to go up as well. Same thing happens over here in the spin column. It can tell us how many more average RPMs he's getting versus his curveballs than he was on the year. I know what you're thinking. Dom, does that mean he was using sticky stuff? No. This is not a big enough jump. Plus, it correlates with a velo jump. Now, if the velo was still, let's say, for his curveball down at 80 to 82 miles an hour like it was in April, and he had a massive jump in spin, that's where you see the red flags of like, wait a minute, what's going on here? But this correlates with higher velo, higher spin. And that also matches what we were talking about with the pitch plots here. I'll go back here. Remember how we talked about how there's a lot more movement back in April and there was a little bit less velo on those, right? Well, there's less movement, just marginally, right? So imagine this big cluster here. This is actually a little bit higher for this cluster, whereas the curveballs are a lot past the 12-inch mark on the horizontal movement. There are none past the 12-inch mark on the horizontal movement here. So tighter, it's easier to control. He understands what it's going to do out of his hand. That all comes back to the higher velo. Another thing that could be at play here is adrenaline. You got to always factor in the human element of this, that he's fired up to finally be back on a big league mound. He's had a rehab assignment from hell, to say the least, where he had the knee flare up on his last start. Then he had a couple of rainouts. Then he got hit by a comebacker and had the all-star break in the middle of all this. So it has been brutal for him to finally come back. So that could also help explain the velo. A few more things here that I want to break down with the usage from Sunday. One of the number one things that jumped out to me about DL Hall in this game was not the strikeouts and not the swings and misses, but how little he used the fastball. Earlier in the season, I have this prepared. In his first 4 starts as a Brewer, we can look at what he did on the season, his pitch types, just overall usage, regardless of count. He threw a fastball virtually 50% of the time back in April, and it was a more even split with his curveball and changeup, and then sprinkled in a few sliders as well. But that got me thinking, is that because of falling behind in the count, because we know we had so many walks, or maybe there were more runners on base, and there were things that he had to worry about, okay? Whereas in this last start, again, on Sunday, we can look at it by count here, we can see how many times he actually fell behind in the count. And furthermore, this is another smoking gun, if you will. He threw a lot more secondary pitches on the first pitch of at-bats. And even when he was behind in the count, look at 1-0 here. He only had 10 1-0 counts. He threw 7 changeups or curveballs. So 70% of the time when he was in a 1-0 count, he was throwing a non-fastball. In a 2-0 count, he threw a changeup, okay? Using the fastball less, with the exception of the 1-1 counts. And then he even surprised some hitters with fastballs in 0-2 counts, and then we saw a lot more of the slider late in the game. A change in approach and a change in usage suggests to me that A, he's getting into better counts, and B, he wants to use more of his breaking stuff. This is back in April now. Look at how much more red we see on this instantly, how much more he was relying on the fastball. Like we just talked about with the 1-0 counts, he threw 53% of the time, he threw a 4-seam fastball on a 1-0 count in April. Furthermore, with a 1-1 count, 51%, which is more in line with what he was doing on Sunday, but now here, 2-0 count, more fastballs, 62%. That kind of tells you a little something about maybe his game plan moving forward, given how much fewer or how much less often he used the fastball in Sunday's game. Part of that might have to do with the fact he was facing 8 right-handed hitters, and you change your usage based on the alignment, the lineup you're seeing. The last thing on the usage, and maybe this is more on the performance front for DL Hall that really surprised me on this one, You've heard me talk about the CSW rate, the called strike whiff rate, meaning these are your best strikes that you can get, a batter swinging and missing or getting called strikes. And anything over 30 is really, really good. When you think about 30% of all of your pitches being called strikes or whiffs, okay, that means maybe another third of them are being put in play and you've got a great defense behind you. And then the other third are maybe going to be pitches outside of the strike zone. That's not a bad ratio to work with there. And the fact that he was over 30% on all his changeup, his curveball, and his slider, I think is really important because once again, we can go back and look at this start by start. You can see here, this is the number that is our CSW rate that we're looking for here. And you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be back in April. But now let's go ahead and switch this to only be on his off speed and on his breaking ball. So this is where we'll have to change the total pitch parameter. So only including these pitches. How was his called strike whiff rate on the secondary pitches? This is one of the number one things that jumped out to me. Again, we're arranging it by date. Below 30%, way below 30%. Almost 30%, really good in his last start before he got injured, and then back on track, 35% total. That's all of his pitches for his called strike whiff rate. That's something that you can hold and sustain and keep things going in the right direction. So maybe he'll see a few more lefties in his next start, but facing this many righties and having that much trust in his secondary pitches, specifically the changeup and the curveball, fewer sliders than we had seen. The rate is about on par with what we had seen, but more changeups and more curveballs than what he had seen to replace those fastballs he had been throwing. All in all, you can see from the movement profile, this is a different pitcher than what we saw in April. And I think most notably, a healthy pitcher than what we saw in April. Pat Murphy sort of revealed in the press conference before the game on Sunday that, DL was kind of pitching through an old knee injury during spring training, and that when he re-aggravated it on the bunt attempt in St. Louis in April, that they were kind of knowing this could have happened, and with all the weight of trying to get the second opinions and everything, and decided to give it rest and give it rehab, perhaps this is a sign of what's to come with DL Hall is healthy. We'll keep an eye on that knee for the rest of the year, but when the velo's up, and when the slider is as effective and the changeup was really good against all these righties too, you can see why the Brewers are insisting DL Hall be a starter because he's got 3 legitimate pitches. In fact, the Orioles kind of took his curveball away from him. They did not think it would be a viable pitch, and it was his best pitch coming out of high school in Valdosta. I think DL Hall is a starter. I really do. After seeing this gave me a little bit of new life and new belief that he can do this, and you hope for A, healthy offseason, and B, more experience here in these final 8 or 9 starts down the stretch for the Brewers to really find out what he can be capable of here at the end of the season. So DL Hall is back. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of what we learned, the differences of the April and August DL Hall. I'm ready for the Dodgers to be in town. I hope you guys are ready for it just like I am. So thank you so much for watching. I promise I'll be back here a little bit more often than I was in the last month or so. But I hope you guys have enjoyed these breakdowns. If so, like, comment, subscribe. You know the drill. I just do the YouTube stuff for fun. Honestly, I just enjoy talking about this, and I would look at this anyway, so I figured might as well record myself while I'm breaking down, trying to learn things about what guys are doing for the Brewers. So thank you for watching, as always, and until next time, keep on swinging.